Hey, what's up everybody? Today we're going to discuss a Jade Harvester Greater Rift pushing build for patch 2.4. This build should be able to push 80 plus with proper gearing. I'll go over the abilities, the gear, Kanai's cube, and then all the alternative options as well. The set is very basic in concept. You apply your Haunt and Locust Swarm, and then blow up the damage over time effects with Soul Harvest. However, this set is one of the harder to master in the game. The first thing I want to do is go over the mechanics of the Quetzalcoatl Voodoo Mask with the Creeping Death passive, and how that synergizes with the Jade Harvester set bonuses. So let's go over what the Jade set does. The 2 set. When Haunt lands on an enemy already affected by Haunt, it instantly deals 60 seconds worth of Haunt damage. The 4 set. Soul Harvest gains the effect of every rune and has its cooldown reduced by 1 second every time you cast Haunt or Locust Swarm. In the 6th set, Soul Harvest consumes your damage over time effects on enemies, instantly dealing 150 seconds worth of remaining damage. In patch 2.4, Blizzard has made Creeping Death make our Haunt and Locust Swarm last 3600 seconds, or 1 hour. The Quetzalcoatl Voodoo Mask compresses this duration by half, so 1 hour becomes a half hour. The Quetzalcoatl also does the same total damage of the DOTs, but in half the duration, effectively leading to double damage per tick. So, the Jade Harvester 6-piece consumes 150 seconds worth of dot damage with Creeping Death. So after about 11 or so Soul Harvests, you'll need to reapply your dots, which is really just Locust Swarm because you'll be constantly spamming Haunt anyways. Now let's take a look at the abilities. You really only have 2 options for Haunt. I prefer Haunt Resentful Spirits. It releases 2 spirits at once, so you can spread it onto mobs faster, as well as hitting 2 targets with the 2-piece Jade Harvester bonus. Your other option is Poison Spirit, which gives 20% more damage to affected enemies. Now keep in mind, whatever element type you decide to run on Haunt is the type that you want to stack on your gear. So if you're running Resentful Spirits, you want cold damage on your bracers. If you're running Poisoned Spirit, you want poison damage on your bracers. You want to be constantly spamming Haunt for the damage from the 2-piece bonus, as well as to reduce the cooldown of Soul Harvest with the 4-piece Jade Harvester bonus. Next up, Locust Swarm. Currently I'm not running the Vile Hive Mojo. The version of the build that I like does not run it, but it is a good alternative, and if you do run it, it gives you the Pestilence rune right off the bat, so you don't need to run Pestilence on your bar. If you're not running it like I am, you do need to run Pestilence on your bar. That way the Locust Swarm jumps quickly to pull mobs from far away and get the damage spread quickly. But again, if you are running the Vile Hive, either on your character or in the cube, then you can run the Cloud of Insects rune, which affected enemies deal 25% less damage with this rune. Piranha's Paranado is up next. This gives us a slight damage buff, but it's really there to pull mobs together. Soul Harvest is a very short range ability, so proper use of Paranado can really make or break a Greater Rift run. This also gets affected by Creeping Death. Spirit Walk Jaunt. 3 seconds of invulnerability timed properly can allow you to dodge the majority of nasty affixes. The Severance rune is a potential option, but I don't think you want to lose that extra second with the Jaunt rune. Next up, Soul Harvest. With the 4-piece Jade Harvester bonus, we get every Soul Harvest rune. So we're going to get mana back, a nice heal, which timed properly will keep you alive quite often, 10% armor per stack with Languish, 5% movement speed per stack with Soul to Waste, and then a little extra damage with the last Soul Harvest rune. It's really important to try and time your Soul Harvests to line up with your Convention of Element procs. So for this particular setup, since we're running the Cold Haunt rune, we really want to make sure that we Soul Harvest at least 1 time during the cold rotation of Convention of Elements. Horrify Frightening Aspect. This rune now gives 50% more armor for 8 seconds after casting, just a huge toughness increase, as well as gives the build some nice crowd control. Next, the passives. Spirit Vessel. The higher you go in Greater Rifts, the more valuable a Second Life passive is, and it's no different for Jade Harvester. Confidence Ritual. You'll always be within 20 yards when you Soul Harvest, so this passive has great synergy with the build. Graven Justice. You're really trying to Soul Harvest as much as you possibly can, so Graven Justice is an obvious choice for the massive cooldown reduction on kill, as well as bonus life and mana. And then we've got the Creeping Death passive, which we've already discussed in detail. Next up we have the gear, and the first thing I want to talk about is the weapon and offhand options. Now as far as the weapon on your character, the Sacred Harvester is really the go-to. Getting 10 stacks of Soul Harvest is absolutely insane in this build. For one thing, you're getting armor per stack, you're getting intelligence per stack, you're going to get more damage reduction per stack from the Lacumbra's ornament, the brand new bracers, and then you're also getting more movement speed per stack as well. Just a great weapon all around, and ideal stats would be weapon damage, intelligence, vitality, and a socket. That mana regen roll is unfortunate on the one that I have. And then I'm currently running the Henry's Perquisition offhand. Now I think that this is just fantastic in the build period for when you're trying to run through the rifts to kind of create density. This keeps you alive. Stats wise, you'd want int, crit damage, more than likely vitality over the elite damage, although elite damage isn't terrible, and then haunt damage. And then I'm running the Furnace in the cube for 50% more elite, champion, and boss damage. Now, there's quite a few options you can go here as far as weapons and offhands. A lot of people have been running the Vile Hive either in the cube or on their character, and then running the Henry's Perquisition as well, so either cube one or the other. And this does give you the Pestilence rune, which allows you the option to run the Cloud of Insects on your bar for that more damage reduction. And this gives you more damage to your Pestilence. But Pestilence ends up being really not near as much of your damage as Haunt is. And so you're kind of going the Furnace route without the Vile Hive. You're opting for more elite and champion damage and a little bit less toughness. I think you can just play properly and not need the toughness from the Cloud of Insects rune, to be honest. And so I think the Furnace with the Kitty Cat on your character is the way to go. One other option would be the Wormwood in the cube to cast your Locust Swarm for you. But again, it's something that you don't really need. Casting Pestilence every so often isn't that big of a deal. It really doesn't slow the runs down. There was a time with Jade Harvester where there were mana issues with the build, but these days you have tons of mana, and just casting it every once in a while, especially with how long that it lasts with Creeping Death, I really don't think the Wormwood is very good for pushing builds. Now, with that said, the Wormwood's great for speed runs, for Torment levels, or for even doing like speed 50 to 65s, it would probably still be really good as well, where you don't want to have to stop and cast your Pestilence because you're killing so quickly. Next up, belt options. So I'm currently running the Belt of Transcendence, so you get that line of fetishes in front of you that will block enemy attacks. And it has tons of synergy with the Endless Walk set, because with this set you're really trying to stand still as much as possible. Once you get to a point where you've kind of created your density, you want to sit still and get as much damage bonus out of this as you can. And that line of fetishes sits in front of you and really allows you to do that. So I think that synergy, if you're going to run the Endless Walk set, the Belt of Transcendence is the way to go. With that said, the Haunting Girdle is also very good, releasing one extra spirit, especially factoring that in with the two-piece Jade Harvester. I think if you're running Poisoned Spirit that just releases one spirit, the Haunting Girdle is a little bit better. If you're running the Resentful Spirits route, I think the Belt of Transcendence Endless Walk setup is the way to go in my opinion. That brings us to the rings setup. So again, the Endless Walk, we've got the Compass Rose here. Now ideal stats would be Intelligence, Crit Chance, Crit Damage, a socket, and then probably a Vitality roll. You could opt for another damage roll though if you wanted to. These are notoriously hard to roll well though, unfortunately. And then we've got the Traveler's Pledge up top here. Intelligence, Crit Damage, Crit Chance, and a socket. And this set is just fantastic for a lot of different builds in the game, but especially for Jade. Getting that extra damage mitigation while you're kind of moving through the rift, creating that density again, just like the Henry's Perquisition does for you. And then on top of that, getting the added bonus of getting a huge damage increase once you've made the density to then stop and start casting your haunts is really, really good. And then we've got the Convention of Elements with an Intelligence, Crit Damage, Crit Chance, and a socket roll. I can't really imagine not running the Convention in this build, especially with the synergy with Soul Harvest. Whenever Convention rotates around to whatever your element of choice is, and then you Soul Harvest during that, after you've already applied all your dots, you deal huge damage, and it'll just nuke down elites and champions. And then our other jewelry slot is in the cube, the Ring of Emptiness. You deal 100% increased damage to enemies affected by both your Haunt and Locust Swarm. So just a huge damage multiplier right there. And I have seen some people running Unity, and this was ran a lot, especially early on in the PTR, but I think that you don't really need the toughness from this. Basically what you're trying to do with this build is get to a point where you're not getting one shot. If you're not getting one shot by things, then you have enough toughness. Because with the Soul Harvest giving you life back and being able to spirit walk out of things and stuff like that, go pick up health globes, you're really okay as long as you're not getting one shot. You have a good amount of CC and a good amount of healing. And I don't think you need the Unity, but it is an option if you decide that you just need more toughness for the build. We've got the Quetzalcoatl in the cube. We're running just full 6-piece Jade with no Ring of Royal Grandeur, so this is going to be the armor cube. And as we've already talked about, this effectively doubles your damage, so it's very mandatory to the build. And then next up we got the Lacumbra's Ornament. 6% damage reduction per stack of Soul Harvest, and that stacks up to 10 times. So just a huge damage mitigation there. And then I've got cold damage on mine because I'm running Resentful Spirits. You can go with Poison if you're running Poison Spirit. And then you want Intelligence, Vitality, and Crit Chance. As far as the Jade pieces themselves, on the Jade Harvester's Wisdom, I've got Intelligence, Vitality, Crit Chance, and a socket with a life percentage gem. Now, I found I was getting one shot a little bit with my current setup, so I went with the life percentage gem, and it did kind of help things out. I think a CDR gem is the better option as long as you're not getting one shot by most things, depending on whatever Greater Rift level you're doing at the time. On the shoulders, Intelligence, Vitality, Haunt damage, and then you're going to want a cooldown reduction roll over the all resist. On the Jade Harvester's Mercy, Intelligence, Crit damage, Crit chance, and cooldown reduction. Chest piece, Intelligence, Vitality, Haunt damage, and 3 sockets. On the pants, Int, Vit, Armor, and then 2 sockets. And then on the Jade Harvester's Swiftness, Intelligence, Vitality, Armor, and Movement Speed. If you don't have a single resist as a secondary, you can also go all resist over the movement speed if you want to. As far as legendary gems, we've got the Bane of the Trapped, pretty much the best standalone damage gem, and it's going to be procced all the time by our Haunt, which slows enemies. And also on top of that, being really in melee range a lot as well, with the secondary effect proccing it. Got the Esoteric Alteration. Now, this will really keep you from getting one shot, and I think it's pretty mandatory to the build. I've tried to run Taeguk instead to get the armor and damage out of the gem, and it didn't feel right. I felt like the Esoteric was just really, really necessary. You could play around with it and maybe decide that you don't need it, but I think you're probably going to find the Esoteric Alteration is a mandatory gem for this build, especially the higher you go. And then we've got the Bane of the Stricken. Now, the majority of builds these days run Bane of the Stricken, and Jade Harvester is no different. It's going to take you 5 or 6 minutes to kill Rift Guardians if you don't run this. With Bane of the Stricken, you will melt Rift Guardians. So I think you should definitely run it. Now, as far as all the defensive stuff goes with this build, you know, as we talked about the Esoteric and all those different things, there's potential to go a full glass cannon setup and go fishing for the absolute perfect Rift. And that is something that you can always opt to do if you have tons of keys or you're at the end of the season and you're trying to push with Jade and you're just looking for that perfect Rift where you want more damage, and the more damage the better because you're not going to be getting hit by things, what have you. Go for it. But for a consistent build, I think this is the best that I've come up with, and you know, not necessarily even just me. A lot of people on the PTR have been doing the same exact thing or very similar setups. To really great effect. Paragons. Get as much movement speed as you need and then go intelligence unless you really feel like you need more vitality. Offense wise, crit chance, crit damage, then CDR, then attack speed. Although attack speed is interesting because casting Haunt faster will reduce the cooldown of Soul Harvest. But I think overall CDR is just better. Defense wise, armor percentage, life percentage, all resist, life regen. Then utility. If area damage is working properly, then you're going to want area damage first, then life on hit, then resource cost reduction, and then gold find. As for your follower setup, I prefer the Enchantress, although you could definitely go Templar or even Scoundrel if you preferred it, but you definitely want the follower can't die token. I went with the Thunder Fury. You could also go with an Unjeng Do with lightning damage on it. You could also go with the Sultan of Binding Sand on the Enchantress. But you really want the S of Johan for sure to pull mobs together. And then the brand new Oculus Ring gives 85% extra damage while standing in the area, which is a huge damage buff. and then the ward for some stuns from the lightning damage. So that about wraps it up, guys. Hopefully it helped some of you. I'm really happy that Jade is back as a playstyle. I think it's one of the more rewarding playstyles. It definitely rewards the player for playing properly and you know, dodging affixes and using your cooldowns in the correct order and things like that. So definitely glad to see it back, and it is absolutely 80 Greater Rift viable. It's obviously not as good as it was when the PTR first started, but it will still be a viable spec in its current form in patch 2.4. So anyways, guys, if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. I really appreciate all of you watching, and I'll see you next time.